All right, eighth graders, let's get started. We're going to be talking about India. So, we talked last week about the religions in India. We talked a little bit about culture. We talked a little bit about the flag, really overview stuff. But I would like for us to jump in a little harder now and take a look at the physical features of the subcontinent. And again, India is a subcontinent. It's its own. It's a big enough chunk of Asia to qualify as in the category of subcontinent. And if the tectonic plates had moved a little bit differently, it would be its own continent. So there are six physical features that I want us to look at. There's the Himalayan mountains in the north. Then there's the northern plains just under the Himalayan mountains. That's where the three major rivers are, and that is one of the best farming areas. There's the Peninsular Plateau, which is a result of those tectonic plates interacting with each other. Then we have the Indian Desert. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then there's the coastal plains, and last but not least, the islands. So let's take a look at the map here, and we'll talk about those. So the Peninsular Plateau region is probably the biggest region in India, and that's why it's number one, and you can see it in light green here. It is a plateau, so it's a broad, flat, high region, and it makes up the biggest chunk of India. You can see it right there, right? That is the Peninsular Plateau. And the reason the Peninsular Plateau is there is because this whole subcontinent was a chunk of land, a tectonic plate that was drifting up north, right? Sliding straight north, slamming into Asia. And that's why the Himalayan mountains are here, because as this big chunk of land comes slowly slamming up into the Asian continent, as it comes riding up in here and it starts pressing into the area, the land has nowhere to go. So where does it go? It goes up, and that's where that's why the Himalayas are the highest mountain region or mountain range in the world. Interestingly enough, the I think it's Mount Everest. Mount Everest is getting a quarter of an inch taller every year because India, the subcontinent of India, continues to keep slamming up into Asia. The next is the northern mountainous region. You can see that in purple here, right? So India does have borders that go up into the Himalayas, and you can see the Himalayan regions are represented here in light purple. Then there's the North Indian Plain, and that's in yellow here. That is the three huge rivers that feed this, and this is really India's breadbasket. These floodplains get a lot of water in the monsoon season. They get a lot of water in the wet season, and then in the dry season, they're very, very dry, which makes this a great place for agriculture. You can grow things when you have a lot of water, and then you can use those huge rivers that have been swollen by the rains to take care of your crops in the dry season. And that's the North Indian Plain. Next is the coastal plain, and that's exactly what you'd expect. It's this bit right here that stretches all the way down and all the way around, right along the coast of India, and it's a plain, and that's another region that we talk about. Then we have the Indian Islands. You can see those represented out here in white, and also out here in white. Those are the Indian Islands, and last but not least, the Indian Deserts, and they're in the western region here. They are not represented on the map, but we'll talk about them anyway. All right, so let's talk about the Himalayas. The Himalayas are geologically very young mountains, and they're fold mountains, which means that they are folding up on themselves as two plates pushed together, and they stretch over the northern borders of India, separating it from China and Tibet. These mountains range in a west to east direction from the Indus to the Brahmaputra. You're not going to need to remember those two names. But the thing to know about them is that the mountains are very young. The bigger the mountain range is, the younger the mountain range is. So the Himalayas cover a distance of about 24,000 kilometers. That works out to be about 1,800 miles. Their width varies from about 400 kilometers in Kashmir to 150 kilometers in Arunachal Pradesh. And those are not pieces of information you need to know. However, they are the tallest mountain range in the world, and they are also one of the youngest mountain ranges in the world. The bigger the mountain, the younger they are. And here you can see some pictures of the Himalayan mountains. And when you're looking at this, it makes some sense, right? The older the mountains are, the more time they're going to have for rain and erosion to wear them down. So younger mountains are generally taller. We got a little spinny thing there. Very nice. All right. Now, let's talk about the northern plain. And remember that northern plain is that thin stretch along the top of India. It has been formed by the interplay of three major river systems. There's the Indus River, the Brahmaputra River, and the Ganges River. And all three of those rivers run along that top section, which creates a very rich soil, combined with really good water supply, favorable climate. It's a really good part of India for growing crops because you get a lot of rain. That rain then creates these floodplains. Those floodplains then drain. But because the rain has been hitting for so long, those rivers keep rolling and you can use them for irrigation and grow crops in that floodplain, which gives very fertile soil. You can see here some pictures of that region of India. And here we're going to show you again, right? Like I can show you on the map right here. This is that region of India, right up here in that northern section, up against the Himalayas. And it makes sense with what we know about rainfall, right? That those winds are going to come off the ocean. They're going to bring all that moisture and they're going to hold that moisture until they hit those mountains. Well, when they hit the mountains, what happens? The air has to go high up. And when the air goes up high, it gets cold. When water gets cold, it freezes and it falls as rain and snow. And that's that piece, right? That as it hits those mountains, the thinner, colder air forces the water out. And that gives you a lot of rain in that region, which gives you a lot of water, gives you agriculture. Then we've got the Peninsular Plateau. And again, this is the biggest part of India. The Peninsular Plateau is a table of land formed due to the breaking and drifting of those tectonic plates. And it is a higher section of land that pushes up against the Himalayan mountains. And that tectonic plate, as it pushes into the Himalayas, not only is it rising itself, but it is also pushing those mountains up. And that's why the Himalayas are the tallest mountains in the world. And then we have the Indian deserts. Those are on the western margins. It's an extremely sandy plain covered with dunes, and they get very low rainfall. But streams are going to show up in the rainy season anyway, right? The rain might not be falling in this part of the world, but it's going to fall in other places. Those streams and those rivers are going to flow into the desert, but very soon they disappear into the sand. They do not have enough water to reach the ocean, right? So in that western part of India, right as India pulls up in that dry region, as it gets closer to Pakistan, you have a lot of rivers that never reach the ocean. They dry up before they get there. And here are some pictures of the Indian desert. And, it looks a lot like a lot of what you would expect from a lot of deserts. And we're gonna spin some pictures again. Then we have the coastal plains. Now, the Peninsular Plateau, right? We talked about the Peninsular Plateau. It's that high region in the middle of India. It's that biggest piece. And on on two of those three sides of the triangle, the Peninsular Plateau is flanked by narrow coastal strips, and those are running along the Arabian Sea in the west, and the Bay of Bengal in the east, and those are the coastal plains. And the coastal plains are really good for getting sea salt because the tide will come in, fill up a bunch of pools, and then it'll go out, and the hot Indian sun, because it's down by the equator, will evaporate all that water and leave salt behind, which can be easily scooped up and thrown into a basket and then sold. And here you can see some pictures of that region. Again, right, like you have a lot of water there because it's in the tropics. It's right by the ocean. So it's very good for growing tropical plants and tropical crops. And last but not least, aside from that vast mainland, India has those two groups of islands that we talked about. And they're very large groups of islands and very biodiverse. A lot of interesting things going on there, particularly when it comes to the ocean life in those regions. Worth looking at, and if you want to know more, meet me in my office hours at 10 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, and pop in, say hi. Otherwise, shoot me an email, and we'll talk about it then. Either way, if you have questions, talk to me soon. Uh, have a good one, eighth graders.